Hey everyone, how's it going? It's your boy Skilled Fawn. Today we are going to be doing a Bloodborne challenge run. Let's waste no time and jump straight into the rules. Starting off, we can only use daggers. In the Souls games, daggers' viability are vastly different in each game. Elden Ring compared to DS1 daggers are distinct from one another. But how does daggers fare in Bloodborne? Well, let's find out on this journey together. Next, no summons. I cannot summon other players or NPCs to help in boss fights. Subsequently, I must beat the game and DLC. Afterwards, I must defeat all bosses. Lastly, glitches and or exploits are allowed, so expect some cheeky ways to get around areas and take down bosses. I'm excited to share this run with everyone as I really enjoyed the Souls series. Make sure to smash the like button, comment, and subscribe to help support me in the channel. Hit the bell icon to be notified when I post similar challenges. Now, let's get into the run. Waking up in the clinic, we head out into the world to see what cosmic horrors await us. First though, we need to head to the Hunter's Dream, the central hub for players in Bloodborne. Here the player can level up, upgrade weapons, and buy items from the merchants. The good and bad thing about a daggers only run in Bloodborne is that the weapon is very early on in the run. Bloodborne only has one dagger, unlike most of the Souls games where there are at least 5+. Now this works for us and against. Since there was only one weapon, it will be easy to level up and get gems for. Downside is I can't switch if I'm struggling with a boss or want to switch things up. Getting the weapon is the toughest part. This NPC located early on has the weapon, but you have to take her down. Using fists, I had to figure out a way to get her loot. Usually gravity in the Souls games is my worst enemy, but this instance it proved to be my ally. It made for a quick and efficient kill on her. Now that we have the badge, we need the souls to purchase it. 40k for the weapon? Yeah, weapons in this game are damn expensive. For this run, it proved to be troublesome. I did debate grinding for an eternity in the starting areas, getting enough souls, but it would have taken a while, and wouldn't have been fun for me to play or for you to watch. Instead, I made my way towards Bloodstarved Beast and took it down with the starting weapon. Using the Chalice dungeon, we are now able to purchase the dagger and officially start the run. I do want to quickly note that after this instance, I warped away and died with the souls as I feel using them for levels would be cheap, at least in this run. Later on, I would use it for purchasing blood vials since I didn't want to run around and grind for them. The reason will become evident in the DLC, but I don't want to spoil anything yet. And during Cleric Beast's fight, we take it on. Cleric Beast is very simple, but can destroy the player if they aren't paying attention. Like all main weapons in Bloodborne, you are able to transform it. When transformed, the player will have two daggers equipped, with entirely different combos. I have to say that I really enjoyed the twin daggers and its moveset. One thing that this weapon excels at is after dodging, hitting an enemy. These daggers have a special modifier where the player gets increased damage on their next attack after a dodge. It was really helpful. Ultimately, we take Cleric Beast down. Near the main cathedral, there is an enemy that when killed by them will transport the player to a different location. I opted to go here to collect some weapon upgrade materials since you can't go wrong with more damage. Next, I want to talk about weapon leveling, gems, and runes. Similar to most Soulsborne games, there are multiple materials needed to maximize your weapon's damage. Many people criticize Dark Souls 2, but one thing it did well compared to Demon Souls and DS1 was that it removed the absurd material variety. Demon Souls I'll use as an example. Each zone or world has one or many associated upgrade materials. In the Shadowman Archstone, where flying stingray-like enemies are plentiful, its upgrade material are Cloudstone shards. In the lava and fiery pit of the smithing grounds, there are Spiderstone shards and Dragonstone shards. I could go on, but I think you get the point. Dark Souls 1 also continued this trend. DS2 was, I believe, the first to not use the weapon leveling scheme. Even though the game has many flaws, I feel this was one thing it did right. Now regarding the gems. Gems can be added to weapons to further increase weapon damage, increase stat scaling, and many other variations. I found in most playthroughs, the best option is increasing physical damage. The last thing I'll talk about in this section is Carol runes. These are similar to runes in Elden Ring, though they differ slightly. In Bloodborne, Kael runes are always active. From increasing maximum health, increasing blood vials, to reducing incoming damage, there are many options to choose from. These were quite important in the run, but won't be useful for a bit since we need the rune tool to equip them. Subsequently, I entered the Grand Cathedral to fight Vicar Amelia, easily one of the more memorable yet disturbing intro cutscenes. This was the first challenge of the run. Vicar Amelia is a unique boss that is able to heal in her second phase. Daggers proved to be underwhelming in this fight. The player is meant to stagger this boss over and over her so she doesn't heal. That's quite tough to do with daggers. Another thing is that in previous runs, I've had this NPC helper come in for this fight. I believe it's Henrik, but I could be wrong on the name. This really helped to swap aggro and also stagger the boss. I had to be ultra aggressive in this fight, otherwise I would have to fight her alongside her rising health bar. Being ultra aggressive meant more openings for misplays and death on the flip side. Yeah, things were not going so well. We will have to come back later on. Pivoting away, I did the Chalice Dungeon cheese again, this time to purchase blood vials. Afterwards, I went left of the Grand Cathedral to Hemwick Charnel Lane. I did this to progress the game a bit and also to collect some useful items. Lastly, I did some gem rearrangement and equipped the better gems I had acquired. Going back to fight Vicar Amelia once again, I was intrigued to see how things would go. Well, things went great, all things considered. I mentioned in my last Soulsborne video this. I actually beat her on one of my first attempts back. This is one thing I found in the Souls games. I recommend for anyone struggling on a boss over and over again to explore another area or even take a break from the game. Usually upon returning, you will do much better. Sometimes you can brute force things, but sometimes you can't, so it's good to revisit things later. At least that's one thing that helps me. I still think this is a great way for those struggling with a boss fight or area. In the end, we take her down, and at the altar, we are able to witness a cutscene and unlock the secret code. Because we have progressed quite far into the game, I decided to enter some Chalice Dungeons for a few reasons. First is that Chalice Dungeons are the best ways to get gems, even in the lower level dungeons. Now I could have gone quite far, and even into some of the more specific chalices like Ailing Lorien and such, but coming from doing the Queen fight in my all trophies run, I decided not to, since the Chalice Dungeons alone would be about 50% of the overall recording. I do enjoy the Chalice Dungeons and plan to fight the Queen again, since it's a really fun fight. I just think it's really tedious grind to get there though, at least for this challenge. Second is that bosses and the areas before them have some decent loot. Picked up the fire paper a few times here, was excited to use them for beast fights. Fortunately, this weapon scales with arcane, so we are unable to use them. I forget the exact name of the material, but the lore reason is that this weapon, alongside Lady Maria's weapon in the DLC, are infused with a specific ore. One of these bosses gave me quite a bit of trouble, specifically Keeper of the Old Lords. Pairing this boss makes this fight super simple and easy, but since I can't use guns in this challenge, it made things 20 times more difficult. We did clear a fair amount of enemies and bosses thus far in the Chalice Dungeons, but this boss we will need to come back later. Next I progressed into Hemwick Charnel Lane until I came across both witches. There weren't many noteworthy things in this fight. The only important thing is that after defeating the witches, we were able to collect that rune workshop tool, now able to equip various Carol runes. Because we defeated Vicar Amelia, we get the secret code to the locked door, and we progress into the Forbidden Woods, activating the lamp. Afterwards, I did some warping until I unlocked the Tonsil Stone. With this in hand, we are now able to enter one of the nightmare worlds, using this amygdala as a guide. Yeah, this nightmare is crazy. The beasts from the main game are more twisted somehow. There are these various squid things that roam the area. This goes to show how creepy yet cool design these enemies are. At the end of the nightmare, we come across one of my favorite bosses from the main game, Amygdala. This isn't the toughest boss, far from it in fact. I just really enjoy its twisted Lovecraftian design. Those laser beams it shoots out are awesome to witness. The main goal of this fight is to continually whack its head, eventually resulting in a stagger. How have daggers proved thus far, and also in this fight? Well, in previous boss fights, daggers were a bit underwhelming, but we were able to persevere through and push onwards. I think one reason for that is that Bloodborne uses a much different damage system than other Souls games, alongside sass effects taking a backseat in this game. Bloodborne wants the player to be ultra aggressive, dismembering bosses and staggering them as much as possible. Daggers have a shorter range than most weapons, and its dismemberment damage seems low. We have to see how this fares later in the game and DLC, and shouldn't jump to conclusions quite yet, but it's still worth mentioning and pointing out. Daggers in regards to Amygdala proved to be a slight hindrance, especially since I was targeting its head. I had to make sure I was in a close position nearby, otherwise I wouldn't be in range for an attack. Ultimately, we defeat Amygdala, taking down another cosmic entity. Back in Forbidden Woods, we go through the area, avoiding the snake-like men roaming around. At the end, we have to fight a trio boss fight. Shadow of Yharnam are extremely difficult to manage. A duo fight can be tough managing the boss's positioning. Now adding another makes it that much more challenging. Each shadow has different attacks. One is aggressive and will charge the player with its sword. Another has a sword but also has some ranged fire attacks. And the last shadow is strictly ranged attacks. I opted to target the sword guy first since I figured it would be easier to take him down. This is another boss fight where pairing them would have been super helpful, especially with our highest skill stat level. At the end of the Forbidden Woods is the entrance to Bergenworth. You're greeted by some bug dudes who happily share the frenzy status effect around. Plunging into the lake, Rom the vacuous spider waits for us alongside her minions. This is an interesting fight. At first, the player needs to take down her minions, leaving her vulnerable to attacks. After a certain amount of damage is dealt, Rom will teleport and the player will need to repeat the process again. Daggers in this fight proved it quite helpful actually, since I had to dodge the spider minions quite frequently and so would get that extra damage from that modifier I mentioned earlier. Sooner or later we take down the vacuous spider. Cutscene plays shortly afterwards, showing the moon glowing red and a baby's voice can be heard. Entering the unseen village, we venture through, dodging countless enemies and multiple amygdalas. This is the area we were at previously, where the player needs to die in that specific area. A lot of the area is blocked off early on, but now that we are mid to late game, the areas are open. Dark Beast Parl is one of the bosses we can find here, and it's so satisfying to deal massive damage to it where it falls over and breaks down. The true boss that we will face in the Unseen Village is the one reborn. For those that have played Demon Souls, this arena and fight will be very familiar to you. I opted to take down the various witches on the upper platforms first, before engaging the boss. Now this is one creepy but cool looking boss. Unfortunately, it's not much of a threat, at least if you know where to stand and when to attack. Another thing is that I really enjoyed the small lore build up to this boss fight. The player can find various notes around Yharnam stating something like this: when the moon turns red, a baby is born. Something along those lines. It's unfortunate that after you fight the boss, there is like no mention of it afterwards, at least to my knowledge. It would have been cool to see why the witches birthed this thing, but I digress. In the end, we defeat another boss. Because we defeated the one reborn, we were able to enter the next nightmare and traverse its landscape. There are two bosses that we will fight here, and the first is MacLeod. The only reason I kind of enjoy this boss is because of his maddening dialogue. Hearing him call out to the cosmic horrors is both interesting yet disturbing. Bloodborne and DS2 are the Souls games I'm the least knowledgeable on, and so I plan to research the lore more for these two games. I definitely got a good grasp from playing the games, but as I'm sure many of you have realized from watching lore videos, there's so much information and item descriptions and beyond. Near the top of the nightmare, I'm not going to say that, but I think you get the point. It's funny because in DS1, the player is able to do the same thing. Murgo's wet nurse is the final boss in the nightmare. To this day, I'm fascinated by this boss and its implications. I'm guessing that this cosmic entity and the baby it's protecting is so beyond our human comprehension that we are unable to see them. Now this was one thing that I was quite disappointed about when playing Bloodborne. There are definitely some areas where having high insight will give the player a different experience. One example I can think of is in Hemwick Charnel Lane, where these shadow guys will pop up in different areas. If the player has no insight while running through, they will not appear. It would have been awesome if there were bosses tied to certain insight levels. Maybe in a zone there's like this creepy lifelike statue, and if the player has 50 insight and returns to this area, then they could fight this boss. At least this is something I would find cool. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. There's a 99.99% chance we will never get another Demon Souls, Bloodborne, or Sekiro, but it would be awesome if Bloodborne 2 incorporated this. At the end of the fight, we play the tiny music box, making the small, invisible, Lovecraftian baby giggle before it passes away. With some increased damage, defense, and health, I decided to finish the Chalice dungeon that I started near the beginning of the run. This time things went much more smoothly, and I defeated the last two bosses on the first try. There's a few things left before entering the DLC. At this point, we are basically done with the main game bosses. All that's left is Gehrman and Moon Presence in the Hunter's Dream. The reason I'm not fighting them is because similar to Demon Souls and DS1, when the player defeats the boss, they are instantly put into New Game Plus without choice. Going back to the Unseen Village, I grabbed the key to enter the upper cathedral levels. There are two bosses here, Celestial Emissary and Embryotis, Daughter of the Cosmos. The Celestial Emissaries are quite easy to fight. In my mind, these guys are more so a lore fight rather than a fight-intensive experience, similar to King Alant's true version. Embryotis, on the other hand, was a challenging experience. Usually in past playthroughs, I was able to stun lock her over and over again. With daggers, I did not have the option to do that. Instead, I had to really pay attention to her attacks, dodging and attacking when needed. Ultimately, we conquered the upper cathedral ward. Next, I made my way towards the clinic. I did this for a few reasons. Gaining her summons was the most important, but also collecting the umbilical cords. This material is needed to summon Moon Presence, one of the final bosses of the main game. 3 are needed to summon it, and this is our second. Because we acquired the Canehurst summons, we were able to enter the carriage bound for Canehurst. I mentioned this in the all trophies run I did, but I'm still creeped out every time I go inside the castle. People scrubbing inside while crying is nightmare fuel in my eyes. A small detail that I really enjoy. At the top of the castle, we have to fight Martyr Ligarius. I was happily surprised by how things went, and ended up beating him on the first try. I was surprised since this is another boss where parrying is a great strategy, and one I found to work the best. Since I was unable to, and with the daggers lower than normal damage, I was interested to see how things fared. Ultimately, with skill and a bit of luck, we managed to defeat this tough foe. With the main game basically finished, let's head into the DLC. Entering the Hunter's Nightmare seems very familiar until you step outside and see that time and space is warped, similar to DS3 in the endgame sections. I say hello and collect the item from Lawrence. Next, we are going to need to fight Ludwig. This is easily my favorite boss to the DLC and possibly Bloodborne as a whole. Now for those unfamiliar with the Souls games, let me quickly explain the DLCs. Generally, the DLCs require the player to be leveled up a fair amount with endgame gear. Bosses in the DLC will have more health and increased damage. Daggers in this fight proved beneficial and a hindrance. Let me explain. Ludwig is a very aggressive boss with multiple attacks that can shred the player. I know this from experience because I died a few times during the challenge. Daggers, with their quick attacks, are able to hit Ludwig a few times, giving me the chance to dodge or attack again. Basically, the quick animation gives me a lot more options than a heavy sword. On the flip side, DLC bosses have a lot of health. Even with decent gems and a fully upgraded weapon, we are limited damage-wise. Because of this, we must endure a prolonged fight. I mentioned in an earlier section that I cannot use fire paper. Well, this would have been an instance where it would have really helped, since it deals additional damage to beasts. In the end, we defeat Ludwig the Accursed. We have a small chat with him, giving him some relief before he fades into the other side. Some NPCs say hello to me with their swords and magic, then we climb the research hall. At the end, we find the living failures, experimented beings that mimic the great ones. These enemies will respawn after being defeated until the health bar is completely down to 0. 2 of them will charge at the player with melee attacks, while the others will sit back hurling magic spells. These guys weren't the toughest in this challenge, but the next boss won't be the same. Lady Maria is the next boss that we must face. In my first playthrough of the DLC, when I got all the trophies, I quickly and easily dispatched of her since I parried her over and over again. Because of this, I didn't get to experience the fight in its full glory. This time, however, I did. I ended up dying a few times and need to really manage my attacks not to get punished. She has a few phases, and it is damn cool to see her blood flame attacks. Orphan of Kos, arguably the toughest boss of the DLC and possibly Soul series as a whole. Now, how do daggers fare against this challenging foe? Not well at all. This was a really big roadblock in the run for a few reasons. Daggers basically tickle his health bar. With very little damage to my name, and with few ways to really buff myself, it meant a long and arduous battle. I ended up dying more times than I care to admit, but this ultimately helped me to become a better Bloodborne player. Sometimes I would warp back to the dream and change my runes around. I found mostly with this boss fight, having more blood vials was the way to go, alongside increasing damage resistance. Phase 2 is the most insane part of the fight, enhanced versions of his previous attacks, alongside some new combos. I found dodging the lightning strike was the toughest since the iframes seemed lower than other Souls games. Eventually though, I got this run. I made sure to play things cautiously, yet rush in when openings presented themselves. Conserving blood vials till phase 2 was the name of the game, as this gave me a better chance at success. With blood, sweat, and tears, we managed to defeat Orphan of Kos, one of Bloodborne's most infamous bosses. The final boss we will fight in the DLC is Lawrence the First Vicar. This was that boss that we initially walked up to near the beginning of the DLC, but he isn't able to be fought until all materials are in the player's possession. Lawrence is an enhanced cleric beast fight. Phase 2 is where things take a massive change though, and I found it to be the hardest. Similar to Orphan of Kos, I had some trouble with this boss, but not nearly as much as the previous one. Sooner or later we defeat Lawrence. With the DLC completed, let's return to the main game and finish things once and for all. I go to where the Hunter's Dream originated and claim another umbilical cord. 3 in our possession, we are now able to summon Moon Presence in the final boss fight. German stands before us, preventing our path to ascension. This would have been another fight where having a gun to parry would have been super useful, but we will make do. At this point in the main game, we are quite over-leveled, since we went through the entirety of the DLC, on top of defeating every main game boss besides the ending ones. Moon Presence stands before us once we defeat German, and this was quite an interesting fight. Moon Presence has this unique attack where it drains the player of all their health except for 1 HP. They're able to rally their health back by attacking the boss, but since we were using daggers, the health regain was very minimal. In the end, we defeat Moon Presence, finishing the game. This has been Bloodborne with daggers only. Well, kind of. We learned that early game, even if we acquire the badge for the weapon, requires a ridiculous amount of souls to purchase, so other methods further in the game are needed. Daggers were acquired, early to mid game bosses were manageable. Daggers proved to be effective in these fights. Daggers start to fall off late in the game and in the DLC. One reason for this is that Bloodborne relies mostly on physical damage rather than status effects. Daggers in Elden Ring and the Dark Souls trilogy massively benefit from the status effects. Bloodborne, on the other hand, has limited status effects. Poison is near worthless. Rapid poison is quite good, basically bleed in Elden Ring, but can be inflicted to a very select group of enemies and bosses. While this weapon wasn't the most effective, I have to say I really enjoyed using it, especially the transform state with 2 blades. In conclusion, the daggers in Bloodborne has its uses but falls off short compared to many other staple weapons, like Ludwig's Holy Blade alongside many others. Daggers are fun to use nonetheless, whether it's Bloodborne or Dark Souls 2. Could you try this run? Yeah, I would definitely recommend a daggers only run if you're a fan of the series or like challenging yourself. Let me know down below your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree? I'm curious to hear your feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It greatly helps to support me and the channel, alongside pushing the video out to others who may be interested. Try to do something kind for someone today, whether it's a small or large gesture. This is your boy Skilled Fawn, and I'm out.